So the season finale just came out, so now let's return to the 1st century AD and talk about what's probably my favorite show on TV right now. The Chosen, Season 3. And if you want to know my thoughts about the first 2 seasons of The Chosen, I have videos explaining those too, so feel free to check those out after you see this one. Or actually, you might want to check those out before to give you a little bit more frame of reference where I'm coming at this from. And The Chosen is what I've been craving for Christian-produced biblical content for what feels like my whole life. And if you watch my other videos, I go into way more depth about my thoughts on biblical content, both Christian and secular. They both have their problems, and most of the time it's usually not very good. But The Chosen has broken that mold for me because I love this show. It's fantastic. The writing is great. Director, writer, producer Dallas Jenkins, he created this show. He has taken such a unique twist on the Jesus story that doesn't completely disregard scripture. He keeps it fairly accurate, or at least plausible, to the accounts in the Gospels, but he takes what I would argue is just the right amount of creative liberty to add backstory, to fill in the gaps, to give these scenes that we recognize from the Bible a little bit more punch and emotional weight than you might get from just reading the straight up narrative. And that definitely has not stopped with Season 3. Season 3 is by far the most ambitious the show has ever been. You really get a sense in this season that the production side of things are really hitting their stride. They finally got budgets to do more, to give more spectacle than they could in the early seasons, while still keeping it narratively pretty small. The scenes don't get much bigger except for one at the very end, which I'll get to, but for the most part it's all the same kind of looking sets, but you can just tell that the actors are more comfortable, the actors are more experienced. Everything else around them just looks a little bit nicer, a little bit more polished, even though it's all supposed to be dirty and rugged and aged. And it is, it's just that in its dirty ruggedness, that to me is beautiful because it's exactly what this show needs. But what I saw watching this show is that a lot of my initial trepidation, initial things that I saw that they did, and I was like, well, that's kind of a missed opportunity, you could have done this. I still agree with what I said back then. I think it would be interesting to see even another take on some of these characters that we don't necessarily get here. But for the show we're getting, it is fantastic. The writing is top-notch. These characters have been developed so well that I can actually tell all of the disciples apart. Even the ones in the background, I still are like, okay, you're Thaddeus and you're Nathaniel. And before anyone gets mad at me, I know Nathaniel is kind of a big player, especially in Season 2, but in Season 3, him and Thaddeus are kind of relegated to the background for most of the time. But even then, they all have such distinct personalities and characterizations, and you really do get a sense that these are 12 individual people that chose to follow Jesus and not just Jesus and his entourage. And what's also unique about the disciples in this season is that you really get a sense that they're being challenged by Jesus and the mission that they've set out to do. They're not all comfortable or totally prepared for what they have to do in this season, and it shows. And the show actually addresses that and doesn't just sweep it under the rug and says, oh, you follow Jesus, your life's going to be great, you're going to have this supernatural ability to go with any obstacle that gets thrown at you. No, these are human people. They make mistakes. They get mad. They get frustrated. Especially with the character of Simon. And I'm going to start with Simon's arc because for me it was the most emotionally impactful throughout the whole season. Between him and his wife Eden, they just had such a great story together. I love seeing it. Well, actually not entirely true. There was a point about mid-season where I started to get a little frustrated because they just weren't communicating, and I'm like, I get it, I get why you're not talking to each other because you're mad and there's a lack of communication in general. One conversation, just opening up, and I think that would have saved us a little bit of time. But that's a nitpick because how they do end up resolving everything is so earned and emotionally impactful and resonant that I really wouldn't have it any other way. You kind of need to see them struggle a little bit to really get that happy ending in the end. And really all this drama centers around the fact that Simon and Eden, they want to have kids. They want to start a family. They're getting a little older. Simon found his true calling, so now he's thinking about, okay, what's my family life going to look like here on out? And the short of it is they want kids. And very quickly after they decide this, that they're going to start trying for kids, Simon and the rest of the disciples are sent out 2 by 2 to the different regions to spread the news of Jesus. And while they're all on this mission, Eden goes through one of the hardest things a woman can go through, and it's not pleasant to watch. In fact, they put a trigger warning in front of the episode, and I was like, okay, so maybe there's going to be some blood, maybe. And they already kind of introduced the idea of the woman with the bleeding for 12 years, so I was like, okay, maybe that's what that is. I was not expecting the opening to that episode being the miscarriage scene, and it's very uncomfortable to watch. But I do think it shows the heart and intention of Dallas Jenkins and company that this show is not going to pull any punches when it comes to how graphic or how uncomfortable certain parts of the Bible are to watch. And even though Eden's miscarriage is not necessarily in the Bible, it still tells us that this show is not going to be some pristine, completely G-rated, family-friendly show. There are going to be more adult-oriented episodes, some uncomfortable episodes, some bloody episodes, and it just gets my brain thinking, well, how graphic is the crucifixion going to be in season 6? Because that, I can only imagine, is going to wreck people, including myself, because we've come to know all these people so well. And when season 6 does come, it's not going to be pleasant. In fact, this season does set up quite a few things that I'm pretty sure are going to get paid off in season 6. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're talking about Simon and Eden. And Eden goes through all this while Simon is away. And when Simon comes back, he's so wrapped up in his own experiences, everything that he had just done and is thinking about. He doesn't even really acknowledge how she was doing or ask and kind of comfort her because she was alone this whole time. He just kind of walks back in as if nothing happened, and that doesn't go over well, and that's where the communication starts to break down. And I'm not gonna lie, that is also hard to watch when you see this couple that clearly loves each other. They had such a strong relationship, and now they're just not talking, and you're like, guys, just say something productive, just open your mouth, and maybe this could be resolved. But that wouldn't be true to their personalities or the experiences that each of them have had. At the end of the day, I think that is better, and it's more gratifying, like I said, in the end, because in the end they do end up communicating a little bit better. Simon finds out what happened, and he grieves and she grieves with him, and it's really sweet. But then the question comes up, well, why didn't Jesus save the baby or heal her or make this miscarriage just not happen in the first place, or maybe raise the baby from the dead? Because we see quite a few miracles this season, and they're all very biological based. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, we see the woman who was bleeding for 12 years get healed by Jesus when she touches the hem of his garment, and the power goes out of him, and that scene is very intense, very emotional, very well executed. But that does kind of draw a parallel between this woman's pain and Eden's pain, and why did this woman get chosen and Eden didn't? And that kind of inequity does breed a little bit of resentment and frustration. And in the same episode, we have another miracle where Jesus goes into Jairus' house and heals his dead daughter. So we've seen Jesus raise people from the dead. So that just shows that, at least in theory, Jesus could have raised Eden's baby from the dead, but he didn't. And this all culminates in what might be the biggest risk The Chosen has ever taken, is at the feeding of the 5,000. Now this is a scene that's been hyped up a lot. If you follow The Chosen on any social media, you know that a lot of their supporters showed up to this feeding of the 5,000 thing. It was like a sweepstake, or you donate so much and you get a ticket, or whatever. There was some incentive for people to show up, and there were 5,000 people that showed up on that set, and it shows. You see them all there. It's massive. The crowd is huge. And if you know the story, Jesus turns 5 loaves and 2 fish into enough baskets of fish and bread to feed all these people. And it's this huge miracle. It's this big high. All the disciples are loving it. They're like, oh yeah, we're following the right rabbi. But after all the feeding's done, they bring in the leftovers, and I'm so glad that this show highlighted the fact that there were leftovers. I love that little detail from the Bible. I just think it's so cool. Simon actually takes his basket and just throws it on the ground in front of Jesus in contempt, and he just walks away. Any show that has the guts to show Simon being insubordinate right to Jesus's face has my attention, because if you know the Bible and you know Simon, who becomes Peter, he's probably one of, if not the most immature disciples. The way I like to think about it, he's like a middle schooler in an adult's body. He's just so gung-ho when things are going right, but when things get weird or shaky, he just freaks out and he panics and he goes back to what he knows. But no matter what, he is all in all the time for whatever he sees as the highest priority. And in this season, he juggles between his priority to his family and his priority to following Jesus. And it's not an easy decision, or at least not an easy decision to maintain over years of time. I'm just so thankful that this show actually acknowledged that and showed that these things don't get fixed right away. But that's not where Simon's story ends, does it? Because we do have the scene that has been kept under wraps this whole time. I had no idea this scene was even in the show, that they were even going to do this scene in the show. I didn't know how they were going to fit it in, but when they got on a boat with a bunch of disciples and Jesus did not go on the boat, my theory brain was activated and I was like, are they going to do the scene where Simon walks on water? How is that going to work? Because he's not really in a very faithful place right now. He just threw a bucket of fish at Jesus and walked away. But as Simon has said multiple times throughout this season, his faith isn't the problem. He believes that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's the one to bring peace and a new kingdom on earth. He believes that 100%. There's no question in his mind that he's capable of doing all these things. The question in his mind is, well, why isn't he helping me? And do I really want to be around this person if they're not going to help me and they're going to help total strangers instead? And all this comes to a head on the water in a beautiful scene. I'm so glad they did it. It's the perfect time to have this scene. Everything's built to it. Simon's in a very turbulent place and he needs that experience of following Jesus, walking on the water, succeeding in that, and then getting nervous, getting distracted, and sinking. All of that thematically is referenced earlier in the season, and it's just beautiful how it all came together. And it looked good. The production design, the budget, the special effects, it all actually was pretty convincing. It didn't really look too cheesy, and the whole time I was thinking, I have never seen a walking on water scene just done in this way, where it actually is anchored in story and motivation. Usually when you see it, it's just like this isolated scene and it's only spectacle and you forget about it right after it happens. No one acknowledges it ever again. I have a feeling that this scene people are going to talk about amongst the group, and it's going to probably stir some conflict, I'm guessing, because why did Simon actually get to walk on the water? Why not John, the beloved, or any of the other disciples? Why was Simon, who has been rude and disrespectful this whole season, all of a sudden get this special treatment? So I can't wait to see how they handle that in season 4. But this season also had a few other arcs, a few other little things that were set up that I don't think will be paid off in season 4. I think it might go to seasons 5, 6. And one of those things is a little detail when Jesus goes to his hometown of Nazareth and he meets Lazarus, the Lazarus that dies and he raises from the dead. So we know that's coming down the road somewhere, but we meet Lazarus and he's a great guy. They're best friends with Jesus, and it was so nice to see Jesus in his hometown where he's not seen as this holy of holy Messiah figure. He's just Jesus, son of the carpenter, and he was awkward as a teenager. He's not good at sports. It was just so cute to see him with real friends that he grew up with, that just see him as the human side, because we don't see that with any of the disciples. Even the ones that he's closest to, there's still that respect for authority and who he is. But with someone like Lazarus, you only see a friend. You see someone you'd want to hang out with, and it's just so pleasant to see. But hanging out with old friends is not the only reason he returned, because he really needed to get this special box with a horse's bridle and bit inside of it that he got from his father. And apparently this specific bridle and bit was passed down through Joseph's family all the way back to the Exodus from Egypt. So right there you're like, okay, this has some importance. But I have some theories as to how this is going to be even more important than just an heirloom from his earthly father who's passed down all the way from the days of Moses. My first theory is that Jesus needs that for the donkey that he gets for Palm Sunday, and he's going to use that. It's going to be all symbolic and meaningful. It's going to be full circle Old Testament, New Testament, and that's why it gets really sad when he tells Mary that he needs the box, and she's like, oh, is it already? Is it so soon? And he's like, yeah, fortunately. And you really get a sense that they are talking about the crucifixion, his death to come. It's not a pleasant topic. It's something that I think they both saw coming, but they just don't like to talk about it, because how do you talk about that? And how do you acknowledge that he's just going to lay himself down willingly? It's an awkward conversation, to say the least, and a hard one for any mother. But I also think that the bridle might have been used on the donkey that Joseph had when he brought Mary, when she was pregnant with Jesus, down to Bethlehem for the census, and then you have the whole Christmas story. And I don't see why it can't be both. I just think it's really interesting that they put so much attention on the bridle of the donkey, even though we don't know why that's important. It really doesn't get resolved this season, but I'm sure season 5, season 6, it's going to be very apparent. I guess those are my biggest takeaways from this season. There was a lot that happened, and I'm sure there are some really interesting things that I just forgot to talk about that happened this season, but a lot of my initial trepidation is pretty much gone. I am 100% on board the Chosen bandwagon now. I love the show. It keeps impressing me both with its artistic quality as well as its biblical accuracy. I love everything that they're doing with these characters, developing them, giving them challenges. Again, this season was a huge challenge on Simon especially, but really all the disciples have been challenged greatly or put in positions where they're not comfortable at some point in the season. And I'm pretty sure season 4 is going to impact a lot more of that for the disciples that I didn't mention, because every disciple has been set up over the course of this season to have something wrong with them. And I love that, because the disciples were not perfect people. They were flawed. In fact, in the Bible, we see examples of them doing the wrong thing. Simon cut off a dude's ear and he wasn't supposed to, and Jesus had to go and grow it back minutes before he was arrested. And even that was a much more mature Simon than what we have now. This is still very early in the ministry. Everybody's uncomfortable. They're out of their element. They're still feeling all this out. And I, for one, can't get enough of it. And as long as these episodes keep coming, I'm going to keep giving videos talking about them. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about The Chosen Season 3, or really any season of The Chosen? What do you think about this show? Has it impressed you as much as it impressed me? Have you not seen it yet? If you haven't, go check it out. It's free. Just Google The Chosen. You'll find a way to watch it. Go experience it for yourself and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.